There is one topic of conversation that I see come up at every literary festival, every book conference, and every author webinar I have ever been to, and that is book sales. But unfortunately, this is also an area of conversation where I most often see authors lead themselves astray. And that is why today we are continuing our 4-part series on book sales with the conversation of the 5 ways you are likely to get this wrong. Stay tuned. You've got the story, you've got the idea, you just don't know the steps in the process. If this is what's holding your memoir back, I have got the solution for you. The Memoir Method Checklist is going to take you through every single step you need from idea to published marketable book. And you can download it now at pageandpodium.com/checklist. In the 15 plus years that I have been working with authors, I find that there is one question that consistently hangs out under the surface of almost every conversation I have with aspiring authors. And the question is, will this book sell? Now, as we are talking about all month long, there is just, unfortunately, not a simple answer to that. Someone may respond to the exact same book with a yes, while someone else responds with a no, and both of those people may be experts. Both of those people may be being totally honest with you, and both of those people may want the very best for you and your book. Unfortunately, there just are no black and white answers. And yet, what I find is that because authors are so driven to make sure that their book is out there, to make sure that they are reaching the audience they want to speak to, getting that message out and telling the story that is so important to them, the question of book sales is just so persistent. And one thing that happens is that we can tell ourselves stories to fill in the gaps of the things that we don't fully know or understand. And from the many conversations that I have had with authors along these lines over the years, I have picked up quite a few themes that tend to be misconceptions or misunderstandings of the way book sales actually work. And today I want to collect those all into a quick 5-part video. What we're going to talk about are the 5 ways that I most consistently see authors thinking about book sales in ways that do not connect with the actual experience that authors have when their books eventually come out. And what I want to do here is not discourage you from aiming for big book numbers. I know that is important to you, and I am cheering you on. There is nothing I love more than seeing one of our authors do really well in the market. But what I do want you to do is go into this process with your eyes open, because I guarantee you, if you start thinking about book sales in the way that publishers and publicists and book marketers do, you are going to make a lot of decisions in really different ways than you would have otherwise. And those decisions are always going to serve you better than decisions that we make kind of out of panic or fear or just misunderstanding. So with that, let's get into the top 5 misconceptions, the top 5 ways that I see authors get book sales wrong. And every single one of these, by the way, I have seen live and in practice. So be sure that you listen all the way through to the end of this video or podcast. Okay, so I want to dive right in, and the first one I think will probably not be surprising to most of you. It is probably something that has been on your mind, and that is Amazon. The number one most common misconception that I see among authors about their book sales is the idea that Amazon is kind of the bookseller that will get things done for you. Now, this idea of things happening kind of for you rather than with you is going to underlie a lot of these mistakes and a lot of things that we'll talk about in this entire series. But the reason I want to bring up Amazon specifically is that so many people think that the way that they will earn money from their book is by individual people going to Amazon and buying a copy. Now, this makes perfect sense because most of us, when we want to buy a book, that's what we do, right? So when we are thinking about ourselves as an author who is speaking to people that we want to reach, It's very natural for us to think of those people as us. And what do we do when we want to buy a book? We go to Amazon. Here is where the flaw in that thinking happens. When we're talking about people going to Amazon and buying a book, that is actually not the first step in the process, right? And I bet you know that intuitively if you're kind of thinking about the books that you have bought and connected with recently. For most of us, we did not go to Amazon and put in a topic and then kind of see what popped up, right? Most of us heard about the book somewhere else. Now that might have been word of mouth. By the way, still the number one way that books are discovered is word of mouth, so don't discount that. We might have heard about the book on a podcast or a YouTube interview that we were watching. We might have seen the book in a conference that we attended, or maybe in a class that we were taking, or maybe a trusted person, either a lawyer, a doctor, a clergy, or somebody like that recommended it to us. But there are lots of ways that these books come into our kind of ecosystem, right? There's lots of ways that books come onto our radar. And what I find is oftentimes people kind of forget about that step. We want to think about that reader clicking onto Amazon and buying our book, and that's kind of the long and short of the process, right? So what I want to make sure that you know as you're kind of thinking about Amazon's role is that the vast majority of authors who have a positive return on their investment, so in other words, the vast majority of authors who make money on their book sales, do not make that from one-off sales on Amazon. Rather, the vast majority of authors who make a positive ROI make that ROI from things like speaking, consulting, and training. Now, a couple of months ago, we had Susan Friedman of the Book Marketing Mentors on our podcast for an interview. You should check that out after you're finished with our series. Go and watch Susan's work, because one of the things that I appreciate so much about the way that Susan talks about book sales is that she is so savvy about the way books are actually sold in 2025. And while, yes, it is easier than ever for us to buy a book by clicking onto Amazon, putting it in our cart, checking out, it is also the case that it is easier than ever to publish on Amazon. And what that means is that your book needs more than eyes on Amazon. Your book needs something to build up the trust and authority before your readers even get there. And what Susan will always recommend that you do is focus on your training, your coaching, or your speaking. Many of our authors already want to do this. And in fact, if you are someone who believes so strongly in the message of your book, you are really missing an opportunity not only for book sales, but also to get that message out when you focus on Amazon. So the first thing, and absolutely the number one misconception that I see among authors, is this idea that Amazon is the place that you will earn your money. That is almost never the case. Most authors that I see have a real positive ROI are not getting it from book sales. Instead, they are getting it from their paid consulting type roles. And the great news is, if you can start building a habit of speaking in public, first for free, then for a low offer price that you're going to charge people, and eventually for much, much more if you want to, you will see that you are not only selling more books, you will also see that you are getting the message out, that you are earning other kinds of things, getting your message out, connecting with people, getting invitations to cool places where you can be in the room with change makers. All of these things can come from Amazon, but they much more often come from the activities that we do to promote our book. So, mindset shift number one, instead of thinking of Amazon as your go-to bookseller, shift your mindset. Think about how book sales can actually be part of a promotional pattern. Things that you do over and over, that you get good at, that you love, that will help to move your book while also moving your message forward. In this way, you take all of this pressure off of the individual Amazon sales, and put it onto something you can actually control. You can put it on pitching yourself for talks. You can put it on talking to people who might be able to benefit from your help as a one-on-one coach or consultant. You can think about how you can show up in some of the panel talks and conferences where your people are at, and so many other options. It is so much more empowering when we think of our impact in that way than it is in trying to get these one-off sales on Amazon. And bonus, when you think of it in that way, you are very, very likely to also see an increase in your Amazon sales. Okay, so that is number one. Now, the number two way that I so often will see these kind of misconceptions come up about book sales has to do with the New York Times bestseller list. Now, I suspect at least a handful of you tuned into this video hoping I might give you a tip on how to hit that New York Times bestseller list. And unfortunately, that is not what I'm going to do, because just like getting one-off sales on Amazon, getting on the New York Times bestseller list is just simply not something you can control. Now, I want to add a little piece here, because not only is this a mindset that can be harmful, but when you are so focused on getting that New York Times bestseller list, I find that it is very, very tempting to try to find shortcuts. And I find this with folks who are really focused on that New York Times bestseller list, even more than the folks that are focused on Amazon. And what I find is when you are so focused on the New York Times bestseller list, you are very, very likely to get taken in by scams. Unfortunately, that New York Times bestseller, that kind of sparkly, twinkly banner that we all want, is just something that the scammers have really tuned into. And what has happened then is that a lot of folks either feel or believe, kind of cognitively, right? Or sometimes just kind of feel in their heart that there has to be a way to game that system. And there is. But it isn't something that I find that folks who are message first, who are values driven, are willing to do. Typically, if someone wants to buy their way onto the bestseller list, they will need to work with usually a hybrid publisher, because oftentimes the traditionals are not going to play with this. But hybrid publishers sometimes will facilitate a way that you buy your own book until you have reached the bestseller list. I do not find that most people that watch this channel are really into that kind of strategy, because that is not the strategy that's getting your book out there, right? It might result in more sales, it might not, but typically what you're doing is you feel like you have just undercut this thing that you wanted because it was going to validate the work you were doing. And when you are the one that is gaming that system, it just isn't going to feel good. So instead of focusing on the New York Times bestseller list, what I want you to do instead is kind of back up and think about, how are you really thinking about your book's success? Now, we talked about that last week, and if you missed that episode, listen to that as soon as you're finished with this one. But the thing I want to make sure you hear me say is that it is not a New York Times bestseller status that makes your book sales good or bad. And what I find is that this kind of New York Times or bust attitude very often accompanies a sense of perfectionism that many, many of us high-achieving women carry on with us all the way since our grade school days. And that is that there is a pass or a fail, but there is no gray area in between. And what I want to tell you is that the New York Times bestseller list is great, but there are tens of hundreds of thousands of books out there that have changed many people's lives that did not grace the New York Times bestseller list at all. That in fact, your book can sell very, very well and not be a New York Times bestseller. In fact, if you are a self-published author, and there are self-published authors that have sold millions of copies, you will not be on that bestseller list. And the reason is, the New York Times is selective about which publishers they allow to have books on the bestseller list. And two, the way that you get a book to count toward bestseller status is not simply selling it. There are different things that have to be in place for those metrics to even count. And I don't say that to be discouraging. I say that because I think we all need to reevaluate how we think about the meaning of the New York Times bestseller list. I am personally sick of the New York Times bestseller or bust mentality, because if we only had books in our world that had hit the New York Times bestseller list, we would have so many fewer books that speak about issues that need to be spoken about, especially now. There are particular stories that are just never going to be picked up by the New York Times bestseller list. They just won't. And so often, those are the stories that change the world. So, it is a mistake to think about success as New York Times or bust, good or bad, pass or fail. And what I want you to do instead is not think about your success as an author as being a pass or a fail. Your success as an author is a journey. And yes, you can fail, you might. But what really matters is that you have put in the heart and the effort and the values and the messages that are important to you, and that you have done everything you can, everything, even the uncomfortable things, to reach the audience that needs them. That's what matters. The New York Times bestseller list, you might have it, you might not. It might be nice. It might actually not be that nice. But what I want you to think about is that there is so much gray area between a book that is somehow objectively a failure, whatever that might look like, and a New York Times bestseller. And there is no reason that your book needs to be in one or the other camp. In fact, most books aren't. So redefine that kind of pass-fail perfectionist attitude, and I promise it will serve you so much better than focusing on that bestseller list. Okay, the third misconception that I see so often, and it is the one, hands down, that breaks my heart the most, is that I see so many folks who tie a sales number to the value of their project. Now, let me tell you a little bit about how this shows up, because the part that breaks my heart the most is when this shows up before the book has even been written. Let me tell you what I mean. So a few months ago, although this is a pretty common conversation, a few months ago, I had a conversation with a woman who really wanted me to kind of validate and reassure that her book was going to be good. Now, not a word of this book had been written yet, but from the conference, I could tell that she was really proud of the idea, that she felt really driven by it, that she had gotten feedback from people in her ideal audience. This is often, by the way, friends and professional colleagues, and that was the case here, that the story was really good, that they were really excited to read it, and that they resonated with the message she wanted to share. And yet, there was something that was stopping this woman from moving forward with her book. And when we pushed, what we found is that she was really afraid that the book would not sell enough to matter. The reassurance that she wanted from me was that her book would sell enough, that it would be in the public profile, and there would be no one that could tell her she made a mistake. I am sure that you can see where I'm going with this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Y'all know me. When we think about our project's value only in terms of book sales, we miss out on so much of the life-giving creativity, that so much of the soul-feeding, nourishing value of writing our own story, because we take the power away from ourselves and put it in other people's judgment. Now, I think if you are a regular listener to this podcast or video channel, you are probably not someone that likes the idea that you are putting your value, your story's value, into other people's hands. But I promise you, there is probably a part of you in the back of your mind that is doing that. And it's a mistake. So I'm going to give you a couple of different ways that you can think about this, because ultimately I really want you to move away from this idea that your book sales are going to determine your book's value. They just don't. So one of those ways that we can think about this is, what if your book sold 100 copies? What if your book only sold to your friends and family? The people who already love you, the people who already were going to read the book, regardless even probably of what it was about. They were already in your corner. What if those were the only people that bought your book? Now, this is really uncommon, by the way. If you are doing any promotion, this is probably not going to be you, but let's pretend. Let's pretend you're kind of in that camp. You would be disappointed, and I get that. Anybody would be disappointed. But would you still think that there was no value in you going through the entire journey of collecting all this insight and knowledge about yourself, in the case of memoir, of really refining and honing the way that you want to speak your message, the truths that you believe, the values and the mission you want to put forth? Would you really believe that there was no value in any of that? That there was no value in you pushing yourself to perfect a craft, to really dive in and try something new and transparently pretty difficult, and having overcome the challenges of writing that book that I know you feel those challenges if you're writing right now? Would you really think, if nobody but your friends and your family bought that book, that that had all been a waste? Would you really feel that way? And if you would, I really want you to question then why you are doing this process, because unfortunately, there is no guarantee that you will sell hundreds of thousands of books. None. No one can give you that guarantee, no matter how much money you pay them. So if you feel like you would find no value in finishing that unless people buy the book, I'm not sure it's worth your time. But I want to give you a different way of looking at that. And this is that I want you to imagine that you did hit that bestseller list. You did sell tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of millions of copies, your wildest dream of sales. Do you think that that would make all of that pain and heartache worth it? I promise it won't, right? At least we would feel like we reached the people that we wanted to reach. And here is where the kicker comes in. When you think about your book sales, defining your book's values, I bet you're not actually thinking of the sales that define the values. I bet what you're thinking about is the message getting out, of building that audience, however large or however small. I bet that is what makes it worth it. And that, my friends, is such a better way to look at things, because just as I said in point number 1, you are the one who controls whether that message gets out. No one else does that. Book sales, you can't control that really at all. What you can control is how you feel about the message and the value and the truth that you put out in the world. Now, I don't want anybody to come away from this video saying, I didn't even care if you sold any copies of your book. That's not true. I want you to sell copies of your book. But I also want you to know that your personal worth, that your story's value, that your mission and your message and what they can do in the world are not defined by the number of copies you sell. They just aren't. You are a valuable person, and this is a worthwhile book. And no amount of money or numbers is going to change that one way or another. If you sold none, you would not be worth less. And if you sold more, you would not be worth more. You are valuable because of what you can contribute to this world, because of the message and the vision and the value you want to put out there. So we are going to stick to that as our mindset. And what I promise you is going to happen is if you really honestly stick to that way of seeing book sales, you're going to sell way more copies, because you will be able to get out of your own way and let yourself put that message out there and draw your people to you. Okay, so number 3, we are not going to pin the value of ourselves or our book or our process on the number of copies sold. Instead, we are going to focus on the inherent value of ourselves, our stories, and our messages, and move forward that way. Okay, number 4, the second to the last way that you can think about some of the mistakes you're very likely making in how you think about book sales has to do with your publisher. Now, I have talked many times on this channel about the fact that publishers are not your main marketing support. Unfortunately, I talk to so many authors that really want a traditional book deal. And very, very often when I ask them why, the response will be, because I don't know how to do marketing and I want the publisher to do it for me. Unfortunately, most publishers will not do your promotion for you. And I want to pause for a second to talk terminology, because I do think that this is a root cause of a lot of this kind of miscommunication and misunderstanding. Now, in the book sales world, we think about marketing and promotion as separate kinds of things. And by the way, marketing and promotion both come before sales, which is a different thing. So when we think of marketing, marketing simply means that you are getting your book in front of the people who would buy it in the places they expect to find it. Now, here's where I'm going to kind of double back, because oftentimes that is Amazon, and any publisher is going to get your book on Amazon. In fact, pro insider industry tip, all you have to do is publish a book with an ISBN and Amazon's going to scoop it up every time. So as long as your book is available to buy, Amazon is almost always going to want their hands on it. Probably your book's going to be on Amazon regardless of how you choose to publish. But there's other places that you may want your book to be too. And in fact, I just was speaking with an author who had published a more kind of academic type of book. And we were talking about how one of the things she really appreciated about her publisher was that her publisher went to relevant professional conferences and had her book for sale at the conferences. Now, this is such a great example of what marketing is versus promotion. Because if you've ever been to these big kind of literary festivals or professional conferences, you will know that there is typically kind of a book fair room, right? And in this room, all of the different publishers, sometimes independent authors as well, will have their booths where they are selling a book. Now, if you have never been to one of these conferences, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. But if you are a person who is a reader of the types of books that show up at those conferences, you will have seen these. And the reason is publishers know that there is a particular type of reader who is coming to particular types of conferences and who will never miss the chance to buy some new books at the book fair. What they do then is effectively market those books by having them for sale at the place that the reader is looking. In that case, it's going to be these conferences or festivals. Now, if you are not a person that was already going to that bookstore, you probably have no idea that that exists. And the reason is, having a book for sale at a book fair is not promotion, it is marketing. And marketing is about having the book available where a reader goes to buy it. Promotion, on the other hand, is about you, the author, going to where the reader is and connecting with them as a human person. So oftentimes conferences will have both, right? There'll be the book fair, that's the marketing part, but then often you, the author, will be asked to go to this book fair or conference and speak and mention that your book is available at the book fair. That is the promotional part, right? That is where you, the author, are going to the reader and sending them to the place where the marketing happens. Now, the reason that I want to separate out the promotion from the marketing is that the marketing is something that your publisher will do. It's just that I find that so many authors do not understand when their publisher says they will do marketing, that their publisher is not saying they will do promotion. And the reason is your publisher cannot do promotion for you. As a nonfiction author, you must be the face of the book. You are literally the authority, which has the same root word as author. And until you are out there showing your authority, your book just simply isn't going to move from the places it is being marketed. You, the author, need to send people to the place where they can buy their book. And that is active, and it involves you putting yourself out there. Now, the reason that I have this in the Misconceptions About Book Sales videos is that I really want to make sure that you are aware that there is no publisher that is just going to solve all these misconceptions for you. It is vitally important that you, as the author, understand how book sales work. And even if your publisher is running ads, that will not be enough. You must be out there in some way that feels authentic to you. You can think about TikTok videos, you can think about reels, you can think about really any way that you can actively target people in your audience to listen to your message. That is the thing that is going to sell a memoir or really any other nonfiction, is you coming to the people who need you. So think about how can you do that in a way that feels really good? Because every time that is going to win over a publisher buying ads for you. Okay, and the final misconception that I see so often is folks looking for a right answer. Now, I absolutely feel this in my heart because it can be so difficult to just continually be told, just wait, it'll make sense, just wait, it'll make sense, just wait, it'll make sense. But unfortunately, so much of writing, publishing, and promoting your first book is just trying things and seeing what works. Now, I do believe in the value of getting an expert on board to help guide you through the things that they know to be true that you might not have much experience with. And in fact, you will have heard me talk about this in the writing process so many times. There is a trial and error way to write a book, and then there is a trial and error plus expert guidance way to write a book. And while neither of those is going to be any kind of a quick fix or a one-size-all solution, it is really helpful to have that guidance. But when it comes to marketing and promotion, unfortunately, there are a lot of bad actors out there who know how desperate authors are to sell their books. Those people are always going to target someone who is looking for a right answer. And in fact, I hear from these people all the time as an author. They will pitch me $10,000, $20,000, $100,000 packages, guaranteed to get me on the bestseller list. Now, before I go on to why this is a terrible situation, I want to just think a little bit. I want to just pause a little bit and think about why that kind of scam is so effective. Because it is. There are all kinds of scams for authors at all stages of the book writing process. The absolute most devastating is when it comes to promotion and sales. And the reason for that, it's what I talked about earlier in this list. When we tie our self-worth to the sales of our book, it is so easy for us to get taken advantage of because all we want is someone to tell us how we can matter. It makes sense? It makes sense. And I'll tell you what, those scammers, those folks that'll get on those calls and tell you that you can make a bestseller, you can sell millions of copies, very often those calls are going to keep coming back to why it matters so much to you that you make sales. They're going to keep poking at you and prodding you until you cannot stand the discomfort of your book not selling. Oh, it's terrible. I hate it so much. And it's the reason I wanted to talk about it today. So instead of thinking about sales as someone having a right answer, that you're going to find some expert out there that will tell you step by step what to do, how to do it. It's a cookie cutter approach. It has worked for everyone they've ever worked with. I want to tell you with total honesty and transparency, there is no right way to promote a book. There is no fail-safe way that is going to get you on the bestseller list. It doesn't exist. So knowing that, how will you move forward differently? Well, I think one thing we've got to really address is the fact that those book sales are not something that says something about us. They don't even say anything about the quality of our book in most cases. Instead, what we need to focus on is the fact that our journey is what matters. What matters is that you are moving through this process, and as you do, you are learning about yourself, you're learning about your story, and you're learning about your message. And the great news is, I don't know, sometimes it's a little tough love, but I think it's great news. The great news is that as you start to think about the process as a journey, you will free yourself up to think about marketing and sales and promotion in a really different way. When you know that there is no right answer, what does that allow you to do? It allows you to say, I don't like keynote speaking. I'm not doing it. I'm going to find a different way. And you know what? You can. Lots of people have had very successful books without ever doing a keynote speech. Cool. That is great. You have freed yourself from someone telling you that the only way is X and Y and Z. The same is true if you don't like making Reels or TikTok videos. You don't have to, because there's no one right way. And this is a secret of all types of marketing. I remember when I was at the university and I taught courses on marketing back then. And I remember that my students would very often want kind of the secret to social media marketing. They were wanting to be social marketing managers. They were wanting to do social media ad buying, that kind of thing. And they really wanted to know just, how do I do it? How do I get this job? How do I make sure I'm successful so that I can get that promotion? And what I had to tell them every time is that all marketing is trial and error. All of it. Now, is there a degree to which, when you are in a particular field, you start to see trends and things that you can use from, say, one author to another author? 100% true. And I mentioned Susan Freeman earlier in this conversation. She's a great example of this. As someone who works with hundreds and thousands of nonfiction authors, she has seen a lot of these trends. She has a really good sense of what's sticking right now and what's not in the types of books she works with. So she can take some of that knowledge and share it with you so that you can kind of make sure that your book is a little bit more effective than it might have been if you just kind of tried to DIY it. But at the same time, she does not know, just as no one else knows, the 100% foolproof way of getting your book out there. We are all just making our very best educated guesses. And yes, the more educated the person who's guessing, the better odds they're going to be right. But no odds are 100%. And there is still a chance that you are going to have to try a few strategies before you find the one that sticks. So this misconception is unfortunately kind of a bummer. We want to think that there is a right way to publish books. There is a right way to get the sales where you want them. But there just simply isn't. And in fact, that can be kind of freeing. So as you move forward into this realm of getting this book written first, edited, published, and finally marketed and promoted, I really want you to think about how you have been thinking about book sales and whether that mindset is empowering to you. Next week, I want to move on to think about the psychology behind book sales. You are not going to want to miss this one because it's really, really important that we are aware of the psychological things that are happening in our own minds that can not only stop us from doing the marketing and promotion that we know we need to do, but that can also convince us that we shouldn't even try. I don't want you to fall into that trap, so please make sure you like, share, and subscribe so that you don't miss a single video in this series or our other videos on how to write, market, publish, and promote your memoir. Okay, until then, I hope that you are having the happiest of writing times, the happiest of marketing and promotion times, and the happiest of book sales. I'll see you soon. Happy writing. You know what they say, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And this is exactly what holds so many people back on their memoir projects. That is exactly why we created the Memoir Method Checklist, a full, complete list of every single step you need to take to get that memoir written, published, and marketed successfully. You can download it now at pageandpodium.com/checklist.